Hello, everyone. Welcome to People on Dating. I'm your host, Will Morales, and on today's show, I interviewed Dr. Michelle Maidenberg. Well, at the beginning, you hear when I butcher her biography. I was going to edit it, but since I want this show to be transparent, I left it in. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the show, and until next time, I'm Will Morales. Have a great day, everybody, and please stay safe. Bye. Welcome, everyone, to People on Dating. I'm your host, Will Morales. And for those of you who are tuning in for the first time, this is a topic based conversation about the ups and downs of dating. Whether you're 18 or 80, you have a story to tell. But the gist of the podcast is just a conversation, no judgment. Today, I have Michelle Maidenberg, Ph.D. She maintains a private practice in Harrison, New York, where she works with individuals, families, and couples. She works with kids ages 8 and above, adolescents, teens, and adults. Michelle is a co-founder and clinical director of Thru My Eyes, a nonprofit 501c3 organization that offers free clinically guided videotaping to the chronically medically ill individuals who want to leave video. Oh, geez, I gotta definitely edit this out. Who want to leave video legacies for their children and loved ones. She's also an adjunct faculty at New York University, teaching a graduate course in mindfulness practice. Michelle, thank you so much for being on People on Dating. How are you?
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's my pleasure. So Michelle, tell me a little bit about yourself. How did you get into this line of work? What was Dr. Michelle's journey?
That's a good question. I feel like it's been like, yeah, so a long road. But I think the reason I got into this work is just because of how I grew up and the role that I was put in, since I was a little girl, as long as I could remember. My parents divorced when I was really young. I was like 3 years old. I went to 5 different elementary schools. I was constantly moving. There was a lot of, challenging times when I was younger, and I always was in like a pseudo mature role.
Mhm.
And I always took on the role of like guiding others and offering advice and, listening and being very like, and I happen to be personally, I'm an empath. So
Okay.
I really do feel emotions on a really, really deep level, and I'm
Mhm.
emotionally sensitive. So that came just naturally to me to be in that position. What I did discover, though, as I've gotten older into my adulthood, is I did a really good job at protecting myself when I was younger. And for people who date, that, I mean, I'm just putting that out there is, it really gets in the way of our intimacy and really fully, deeply connecting to others because of our vulnerability and our fears that kind of get elicited. So I've been discovering that more and more, through my own work and journey, and realized that that served me really well when I was younger.
Mhm.
And it helped to provide safety and protection, and made me feel very stabilized. But it really was an authentic way of empowering myself. So that's been my journey. Now I really, my life's work is really helping others and in service of helping others. And I get so much out of it. It's really so fulfilling for me. I
Mhm.
love what I do. I used to actually think that it doesn't take much talent. Anybody could do it. I've changed my mind about that too.
Well, that's good. That's good. I'm glad you did.
Yeah.
So no, that's quite a journey, and and it's perfect for today's topic is emotional avoidance, and I
Okay.
just wanted to start off, Dr. Michelle. I had dated this is a few years ago. I dated a woman
Huh.
that to me was void of, if that's the right word, of any type of emotion. And I'm a man that, I'm very affectionate, I'm pretty much touchy feely. And this woman was the opposite. And to me, that was such a huge deal breaker. So for you, when I looked at your bio, I saw that you had that in your bio, emotional avoidance.
Yes.
In your terms, can you explain what does that mean? And if
Sure.
what I said,
Yeah.
coincides with emotional avoidance.
Yes. So I did a TED talk on it's called Circumventing Emotional Avoidance.
Yes, I saw that. I'll definitely put that on the show notes. Yes.
So what I found throughout, my own personal journey and my own personal history, and also with people that I work with on a daily basis,
Mhm.
is we, by nature of being human beings, are emotionally avoidant.
Mhm.
We're wired that way. And when I say emotionally avoidant, it's not of all emotions, generally the uncomfortable ones, right? Which are,
Mhm.
considered negative emotions like fear, sadness, frustration, disappointment, and on and on. Those negative ones that just don't feel good.
Mhm.
And we, why? Because our brain literally is wired to avoid anything that's uncomfortable or anything that we perceive as dangerous, and we
Wow.
go into that avoidance space. And that's just, again, it's a neurocognitive functioning, and it is the way that we are wired on a physiological level. An example of that, and it's pretty amazing, is, if you think, and I ask people to do this, like think of the most like heart-wrenching, memory that you have. It could be from any time in your life where you
Mhm.
really had a lot of distress or discomfort. And people could readily remember, and they could even get into, having some memory of the emotions they felt.
Right.
Right. Like, and again, that heart wrenching, and I ask them, like, where do they feel in their bodies? And they can actually locate it. Like, I felt it right in my chest. It felt like a deep wound, and then I'll say, "Oh, now tap into the best thing that ever happened to you, the most terrific, fantastic like event in your life." And then I'll say, tap into those emotions, and people can't, because
Wow.
our bodies remember negative memories and negative emotions. That's what it holds on to. Why? Because its job is to protect us. So it gets literally concaved in our neural networks, and it
Mm.
becomes our part of our neural pathways, so that our brain again is ready to protect us in the future. But guess what happens? It connects and links to what it thinks or perceives as dangerous, and it could be a trigger of that same emotion or whatever it is, and it's tricked into believing that you're in danger.
So we're talking about even whether it's maybe a business dealing or a workplace, whatever that may be, but also it carries over even to
Interpersonally,
into relationships.
yes.
Is it, and it's funny that you say that because I remember I would try to bring up certain subjects and the subject was changed right away. So anything uncomfortable, the subject is changed. And, I guess I've done that too, where I might not confront someone or a past loved one because of the possibility of maybe us tangling. And am I saying to myself deep down, I don't want to, I'm trying to avoid confrontation. Is that also another way we deal with our issues? Just avoid the confrontation?
Oh, yes, avoidance. That's a huge, huge defense mechanism, avoidance.
Hmm.
Yeah, and where we're void of. So what you described before, the girl that you dated,
Yeah.
really interesting because we tend to go into connection or protection.
Right.
And there's a lot of research and science now based on polyvagal theory, which
Hmm.
is and that's based on our vagus nerve, and our nervous system. So what ends
Hmm.
up happening is we go into this state of protection, and for every person that's different, right? So avoidance may be your way of protecting.
Right.
Yes, but guess what? You may go into avoidance because you're trying to protect. She may have abandonment issues, right? And anxious attachment. And then when you avoid, where does she go? Into feeling abandoned, neglected, etc. And guess what happens between the two of you when that dynamic plays out? Boom,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
It's like you can't see eye to eye. There's no way to make sense. Both of you are wounded. And that sometimes leads to very difficult interactions. And sometimes, like we said, like explosive situations and breaking up and not meeting eye to eye. I'll give you an example that happened
Yeah.
yesterday. A client of mine, which was highlighted so beautifully, like her ability to kind of work through something like this. So, one of the things that she felt growing up was a lack of safety and protection from her parents, and for very good reason. So I do want
Mhm.
to say that, she had every reason to feel the way she did because of the circumstances. And the way that her defense mechanism growing up was to go into rage and anger.
Oh, wow.
Okay. And a lot of people go into rage and anger. Why? Because it has a feel to it where a sense of empowerment, again, a false sense, of course, a
Mhm.
sense of power, strength, right? Vitality. But again, it's an authentic space. Okay. But when you're younger and you feel like you have a lack of protection and safety, you want to be feeling strong, right? So our body naturally does that. So she went into rage and blame. Okay. Now, as she got older, right, she started dating. Here we go, right? And
Yeah.
anytime she got triggered, right, by the person that she's dating, where would she go? She would go into the space of rage and anger and blame. Now, for the person on the other end of that, you could imagine how that feels, right?
Yeah, not a good feeling.
Not a good feeling. And also, it becomes difficult to have a conversation, right, when somebody's in a shutdown mode because they're
Right.
so protective. So we talked a lot about like what does it feel to be in that state? How does it make her feel? What is really going on underneath? And we know anger is a secondary feeling. So underneath anger tends to be sadness, frustration, disappointment. So when you tap somebody into who's used to going into that rageful place and you say, what are you sad about? Or what is disappointed? What are you fearful? It's a lot of fear and worry,
Mhm.
right? What are you fearful of? What are you worried about? Because a little girl who doesn't feel protected is very worried,
Right, right, right.
right? All the time. They're always triggered. They're always worried chronically. So she was having an interaction with this guy, and he said something to her that triggered her. And again, she went into the space of like, does he respect me? And, is this going to be fleeting? Is his feelings for me going to be fleeting? And did he say this to me because of, I don't know, whatever was going on for her. And she mentioned all these fears that was coming up. So I said to her, because she said to me, why did he bring that up? He must have known that that was going to trigger me. Why wasn't he more sensitive? Right? Blame, rage, blame, rage. And I said to her, okay, I hear you. Like you sound really disappointed, right? Like that he brought that up and wasn't maybe if from your perspective more sensitive or more thoughtful. Let's take a moment now and think about like, is there another way of seeing this? Is there a possibility? Maybe it was just a question for him. It didn't even dawn on him that it would have triggered you. How would he know that?
Right. No, yeah, exactly.
And number two, do you really think that somebody wants to trigger you and get you angry? Why would he put himself in that position? That's kind of like masochistic, right? And sadistic. Like, why would he do that?
Right.
So then I said, what are you worried and fearful about? And tears streaming down her face.
Mm.
She said, I'm really, really worried that, I'm worried that, I just got out of a marriage and it's a new relationship. And I just hate this feeling of like the lack of, kind of security, the lack of, um, it feels so unsafe to me. It feels so destabilizing. I was in such a long marriage. I could just say or do what I wanted to without any having to think a thousand, things about it.
Yeah.
I worry. I really worry. And then she was able to say, oh, you know what? Maybe he didn't realize it, and I need to be authentic with my feelings and not necessarily rage at him because that's going to what I really want is connection. But if I rage at him, I'm going to get defensiveness and I'm not going to get my needs met. And then I'm going to fully feel abandoned like I usually feel.
Wow. And at that point, for the gentleman, he's gonna be walking on eggshells because he doesn't know what's gonna trigger her.
That's right.
And I mean, because I, again, with that young lady that I went out with, I felt like there's certain times I'm like, shit, can I say this? Or, is she gonna fly off? And like I said, and you even mentioned it earlier, with negative emotions, we're avoiding the confrontation. I think both of us at times we did that. And we ended up just slowly drifting apart, that we haven't even spoken in 2 years. And I said to myself, if I ever see her again, I would definitely be cordial and say, hey, how's it going? How are you? And all that. But so how do we avoid
So,
emotional avoid?
yes, emotional avoidance.
There's some steps that we could, uh,
Yes,
but I wanted to say, just track back a little bit. If
sure.
he would have said to her, "Hey, what's wrong? Do you want to talk about it?" Would that have helped? Okay, no.
Oh no, because
Okay,
she would have gone into that angry space and she would
okay.
She would have said, why did you say that to me? And
Right.
why did you think that would have triggered me? No. But if he says to her, what are you fearful about? What's coming up for
Mm.
you? I want to understand you better.
Wow.
You're obviously having a reaction, and I really want to understand what you might be fearful about. Maybe not in the moment, because
Yeah.
she may be too activated and she may not be able to get to that space, right? So maybe just reassuring her or comforting her, just being with her, right? And then maybe returning back to that like afterwards. So what ended up happening is she actually put herself out there, out of my guidance,
Mm.
and said to him, when you said that to me, I really went to a fearful place. And I really worry. And this has everything to do with me and my reaction,
Mm.
right? Not based on what you said, because I'm under the impression that you probably didn't realize that you were triggering me. And I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt that you didn't want to really upset me, obviously. But I really want you to know that when you say that, what it brings up in me, so that you get to know me and understand me better. And guess
Wow.
and guess what happened? He was so delighted, right, that he didn't get like the rage and the blame, right?
Right.
But he was so open and accommodating and empathetic, right? And caring and supportive. And what he was able to do is reassure her. I get why maybe you might have felt that way, but I want to just reassure you that I'm here for you. And if those worries come up, like I'm here to listen to you. And next time, I will consider like, oh, how will you feel about this? I'm not going to always get it right because I'm not in your mind and I can't always know what's going to trigger you.
Mm.
Right. So whenever you're fearful, I want to hear you. Wow. Right.
Yeah. Oh, that's a big difference.
Yeah. So that's a corrective experience. That's therapeutic. Right. So he's growing in the process because he's learning how to really kind of grow his defensiveness,
Hmm.
right? And instead of going into defense, right? He is going into a place of nurturance and support and care, right? And she's going into a place instead of raging, she's going into a state of really getting to understand herself better and connecting with her fears and worry so that she could be more authentic and she could be more intimate.
So in a situation like that, where whoever, whether it's a man or a woman, and they're having this emotional avoidance episode, so, for lack of a better phrase, are there any, I mean, do we turn to our closest friend? Obviously, we could do go to therapy, go to someone like you. We talked with Dr. Michelle Maidenberg, and I think that, because what you're saying, it makes so much sense to me now. It's so much clearer because it's just being, hey, how can I help? What's wrong? What's your fears? And it's in certain words that could trigger someone to say, oh, okay, this guy might get me or she might get me. Let me just open up and just say this is what I'm feeling. So obviously communication 101
Huge.
is the biggest thing.
Yeah, yeah. You have to recognize that when somebody's getting triggered or
Yeah.
when you yourself is getting triggered, there's something deeper than what's kind of at the surface,
Mhm.
right? Because sometimes if you really think about it, your reaction to somebody's interaction, it just doesn't add up, right? There's something that's disjointed about it, right? So him saying what he said, might have potentially been impulsive or whatever the case is, right? But it still didn't warrant her rage. That's the rage is more about her. It's not about him.
Right.
That doesn't mean I'm not, absolving. It doesn't mean that he can't like work to be more sensitive or in tune. Okay.
Mhm.
But he still can't take full responsibility, right, for her
Right.
rage. That she has to take responsibility. So you're asking, how do you work on this?
Yeah.
It really requires an openness and a willingness to see yourself. So
Okay.
I can't say that enough. And to really, really go deeply into understanding what scares you, what disappoints you, what angers you, what frustrates you, right? Like you have to really understand that and what is at the core wounds of that. I know for myself, right? Because my parents divorced when I was so young. And
Mhm.
because there was so much rupture and so, so challenging in terms of like conflict and just all of that, I am a master, and I mean it, at cutting off my feelings and repressing my feelings.
Wow.
I really am. Like, and I could
Yeah.
easily slip into that so easily. But what ends up happening is I lose the present moment and the interaction with the person that I'm having.
Right.
And in terms of the way, even visually, the way I'm perceived, it could come across as cold. It could come across as off-putting. It could come across as, non-caring or judgmental. And that is so not who I am fundamentally as a person.
Mhm.
And I know when that happens and I'm misunderstood, I feel so sad because that is never ever my intention because I am
Right.
not that I am not that's not who I am authentic.
Right. No, I mean, talking to you, I can see how you are, obviously. But just to cut you off for a second, Dr. Michelle, but then the opposite, the person you might be with or talking to or hanging out with, I mean, would they get probably offended by like, wow, this person doesn't want to open up to me. This, Michelle is keeping all her secrets, and I'm here to support her. Wouldn't that set that other person off too as, oh, Dr. Michelle doesn't want to talk to me, so maybe I'm wasting my time. Maybe I just look for someone else. So how does
Yeah.
because
Well,
we're also affecting other people around us.
yes. Well, when I go into that avoidant state and when I
Right.
cut off my feelings, I am at risk of disconnecting from relationships 100%.
Right.
And what ends up happening is nobody could read my mind. They don't know, oh, she's getting triggered. And the reason she's going into that space is because she's protecting herself. And like, that's all beautiful, but they don't know all that.
Right.
That's right. That's background information that they have no clue about, you know? However, it doesn't serve me well. It served me well as a kid. It served me really well as a kid,
Right.
incredibly well, but not as an adult, not as an adult. Now, what ends up happening, again, unfortunately, is we become such masters at our defenses. And whatever we feed grows stronger, by the way. So the more that I avoid and the more I disconnect, the better I become at it. And yes.
Wow.
And I don't want to master that. I want to master openness, vulnerability, connection. Like that's who I want to be. But it requires a lot of vulnerability and fear. So, like talking about fear, right?
Yeah.
Like the more I put myself out there, the more risk I'm taking, right? The more fearful I become, but I have to be willing. I have to be willing. So if I die tomorrow, and I think
Mhm.
about this, do I want to die fear based? Do I want to die repressed? Do I want to die avoidant? Or do I want to die putting myself out there, being vulnerable, connecting, authentic, and taking a risk, and sometimes getting beaten up in the process? Hell yeah. That's the person I want to be.
I it's something because you triggered something of a memory of myself. When I was a little kid, I remember I grew up with my grandparents. It wasn't 2 years later when I found out, oh, a few years later, I should say. I think I was in my teens, but I avoided talking to my mother for years to say, hey, how come I grew up with my grandparents and not with you? And I'm telling you, Dr. Michelle, that took years to even get the courage to ask her because I felt abandoned. I had the
Sure.
fear. So, there were certain relationships with women that I had that I just couldn't open up. And if I felt any type of love from the other person, I was gone. And some
Yeah.
of my friends knew this, but to be more open, once I talked to her, I think I was in my late 30s, give or take, maybe early 40s. I can't remember the time period. But when I talked to her, Dr. Michelle, it felt like a lot of things that I had here was released because she told me the story. She told me it wasn't me. It was never about me. It was certain situations that happened at that time. And anyway, it just made it better. And I put myself out there to her because for years I just wouldn't do it. So I kept it in. And
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
in all fairness to you, so I do
Mhm.
want to say this,
Yeah, yeah.
the reason you probably didn't and the reason you were so fearful is because you didn't know the response you were going to get.
Yeah, well, that's 100% true.
Right? Like, you didn't
Yeah,
know if your mom was gonna say, "Listen, I didn't want you," right? Or, "I had you and I really didn't want you," right? So, like, I shipped you off to your grandparents. I'm just saying, like, you didn't know what you were
sure.
gonna get. You didn't know if you were gonna get kindness back or you were gonna get sincerity or whatever.
Yeah.
So, that's taking I mean, that's a huge risk you took,
Hmm.
right? Like, you really put yourself out there and made yourself vulnerable to ask that question.
Right.
And that was huge. That was huge. And I wonder what it was during that time in your 30s, right? Like, what was that factor right there and then that allowed you to switch that on or really connect to your willingness? That's interesting, right?
Well, for me, it was just starting to get into personal development,
Yeah.
reading self-help books and stuff like that, and just being around certain people that were, when if something bothered them, they spoke out.
Yes.
So it was, and like I said, for me, Dr. Michelle, is it was just being also self-aware. Like I
Yes.
started noticing some of the relationships I had or didn't have, and it just stemmed from not hearing my mother say I love you, or she wasn't there.
Yeah.
But again, once I spoke to her, wow, what a difference it made. And whatever pressure I had was just
Lifted.
definitely, yeah, it was lifted. So
So
for the, yeah, go ahead, go ahead.
just one last thing, because you asked, like, okay, what do you do about this? So
Yeah,
I just want to say that it's a very gradual process.
right.
Okay. Now, what I just described to you about this girl who then, kind of put herself out there and expressed her vulnerabilities,
Mm,
I've been working with her for some time,
right.
okay? And we work towards that. Okay. The beauty of it is that she, in her mind, like the perception was, oh, the rage, the blame got me to a place where I felt empowered and I felt strength and right. But she learned that that wasn't authentic. And
Mm,
then as she takes the moments and she makes herself vulnerable and she puts herself out there, guess what she's experiencing? She's experiencing somebody listening to her, somebody caring,
mm.
somebody validating her, somebody, it's a corrective experience where she's able to feel the true love and the true connection that she hasn't ever felt before.
That's a
Wow,
great feeling.
what a gift. And guess what? Guess what? That shit feels good,
Exactly.
right? Like, so when you feel
Uh,
that connection, and I'm talking about a deep connection, you,
yeah.
you want more of that. And you're like, oh, that worked out well. Like, I think I want to do that again. Right. And
Right.
then it happens over and over and over again. And then you believe that, oh, it's worth it. It's worth putting myself out there. Look what I'm getting in return. Right. And sometimes, guess what? You may not get that in return, but you may get a life lesson. I put
Right.
myself out there. That person wasn't ready to hear me. That person wasn't available. That person, okay, that hurts. Right. It triggers my disappointment. It triggers my abandonment. But I know that that's how I want to be, despite where the other person is at.
So we're not taking the blame. Well, for lack of a better word, we're not taking ourselves. What's the word I'm looking for? Where we're not
It's your own set of values.
right. And if that person is not available at that particular them, then it's on them. Is not on me.
Exactly. I know
Okay.
that I was my authentic self. I know that I put myself out there in a way that leans up to my integrity, dignity, and the person that I want to be and
Right.
connects to my values. And I could walk away feeling confident. I could walk away feeling proud. I could walk away feeling empowered despite the interaction that I had. Now, that is a deep, authentic sense of confidence. And there's nothing like it. And I mean it.
No, no. I listen. I've been in that person's shoes and your shoes. We all have this type of connection where something might
Absolutely.
trigger us, something might bother us. But
Yes.
but like you said before, communication 101. It's just not being afraid to be out there, getting out of your comfort zone, because I think we all have. I know I have, and then once you're out there, you go, shoot, man, what took me so long?
Yeah. Well, people always like,
I hate to say it, but sometimes I do say that to myself, like, damn, I could have done this earlier, but I know I wasn't ready.
you weren't there. But
Yeah.
what's so funny? I have sometimes clients saying to me, and I crack up, and we laugh, but they go to me, oh, like, this is hard work. I wish I could put myself back into the person I was. I'm like, sorry, you're not going back, you know?
Yeah, good for you for telling him
No way.
that.
And then of course they say, oh no, I'm so happy I'm out of the clouds, you know? Like
Yeah.
it's like it's so great to be connected and they feel so wonderful, you know, and they're really living the life they want to live, you know, which is amazing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, Dr. Michelle, thank you so much for being on People on Day. This definitely was eye-opening.
Oh,
And before I let you go, just a couple more things. Talk about your services that you have. I saw it on the website, but if you could
sure.
talk a bit more
Sure.
about them.
So I do a bunch of different treatments.
Mm,
So I do something called CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy. I
mm,
do ACT, which is acceptance and commitment therapy. I do EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization reprocessing. I do a lot of mindfulness space work. I do a lot of work around
mm.
polyvagal theory. So it's like a, you know, it really isn't cookie cutter. It really has to do with the person I'm working with. And I'm very, very vigilant about really meeting each person's need, you know, as they are. And I believe
Right.
each person comes with their own set of beauty and worthiness. um, so yeah, and I, you know, I do a whole bunch of different things, as you mentioned before. And
Yeah.
I recently published my book, which is
Yes,
very
I want to talk about them.
exciting.
Yes,
Yeah.
please.
So so my life's work. I published two books. This is my second book. The first book actually is completely different. It was called Free Your Child from Overeating, and it was 53 mind-body strategies for lifelong health, which I
Right.
use with adults, kids, and because I do have an affinity for health and wellness. That's, you know, part of who I am as well. But this book is a self-help book and it is really my life's work. So some
Mm,
of the skills and tools that I talked about today are in the book, and it's obviously a lot more expansive, but it's called
right.
ACE Your Life, ACE
Mm,
Your Life, Unleash Your Best Self and Live the Life You Want. ACE is based on the pillars of acceptance, compassion, and empowerment. So
mm.
the way that the book is structured is, and I call it, you know, a lot of people write books that are kind of topic based on
Yeah.
helping you with a certain, this is sort of a book that you could take with you and, you know, really work on yourself throughout your life. And I really mean that because it applies to any kind of stuckness. And it could be deep stuckness or, you know, slight stuckness. It doesn't have
Right.
to be one or the other. So the way that I structured the first chapter really talks about our thoughts.
Hmm.
It's really important. It's very evidence-based, my book. It's very research and evidence-based. Plus, there's a lot of skills and tools. And each chapter ends with a guided meditation that's led by me with a QR
Nice.
code, which I love because I do a lot of guided meditations. The second chapter focuses on our values, and then the third, fourth, and the three other parts are acceptance, compassion, empowerment. The first parts of those chapters focus on the barriers, why it is hard to kind of cultivate, and the second is how to cultivate.
Okay.
So it's very, very, it's chock full. You could kind of weave in and out of the book, which is nice, but I love the way my cover came out. Yay.
Wow, nice looking book. Yeah, I'll definitely put it on the show notes. So, yeah,
It came out so pretty. Anyway, you can't see it, you know, the audience, but
yeah, but it'll be on the show notes. Believe me, it'll definitely be there. And if somebody want to get in contact with you, what's the best way?
on my website is the best. There's a contact page there, and it's www.michellemaidenberg.com. And that's Michelle with two L's, and Maidenberg is Maidenberg, and that's Maiden, you know, fairy maiden, and
Right.
Berg, Berg. So that's the best way to contact me.
Yeah, no, definitely. Again, I'll put that on the show notes. Well, listen, Dr. Michelle, I my emotions were going up and down in this, this interview. So I first of all, I really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to talk to us.
Sure.
And thank you so much.
And you are a pleasure to talk to.
Well, thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Well, everyone, that was Dr. Michelle Maidenberg, and you can find her at info@michellemaidenberg.com. That's info@michellemaidenberg.com. Michelle, thank you so much for being on People on Dating. Much appreciated. You can find me at peopleondating.com. That's peopleondating.com. Check out our past shows and check out our blog. Also, when you get a chance, please go to Apple Podcasts. Please subscribe, leave a review, tell us how we can make this show better. I'm also on Google Podcasts and Spotify. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for listening. On behalf of People on Dating, I'm Will Morales. Until next time, thanks everybody. Have a great day and please stay safe. Bye.